Hey guys, I hope you're doing fantastic and welcome to the third episode of the Creative Circuit Chats with myself, Tsulu.
And I'm Manele.
Today the episode is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be looking at videos and, having a conversation around the videos that were circulating. So today we're going to be talking about contracts and we're going to be basing it on some of the tweets and, that have gone out by certain celebrities, particularly AKA with the Reebok incident. So where do we start? Maybe we could start by actually unpacking what is a contract.
Well, a contract is a written or verbal agreement
where
parties agree to certain rights and obligations, and for that particular whatever service that you're providing, then there'll be either a payment in financial compensation or otherwise.
So
it's basically a meeting of the minds.
Meeting of the minds.
Meeting of the minds.
And I think it's like the beginning stage of everything, to be honest. To make things work ethically, if that's a word.
It is.
You need to have some kind of agreement. So we get different kinds of agreements, right? We get a verbal agreement, we get a documented agreement, which is the most recognized, if I should put it, ne?
No, I mean, both forms of agreement are actually valid, especially in South African law. So our law recognizes a written agreement, which is an agreement that is either, you type it, print it, sign it, that's written. It also recognizes emails, SMSs, if there's any sort of meeting of the mind that's done through these mediums, and even if it's separate, but you're putting it together, it creates a full picture. It's recognized as a contract. And a verbal agreement as well, what's also known as a gentleman's agreement. We hate the fact that it's so gender,
Gentleman's agreement.
It's called a gentleman's agreement or a handshake agreement where you can verbally agree and say, Tsolo, we'll meet next week, I'll pay you XYZ, you leave me with this nice wig and I'll pay you X amount, and you say yes, I transfer the money, and then you give me the wig and we've got an agreement.
Definitely. So I don't know, is a verbal agreement, how can I say it? Is there evidence around a verbal agreement if maybe you were going into business with someone and then you guys had a verbal agreement of some sort and now you guys are having, hiccups based on what he said because it was a verbal agreement? How do you pick that up? How do you...
That's the biggest problem around having verbal agreements, is that both parties have to prove their case. You have to prove that we did indeed have this agreement and that the parties agreed to XYZ. And I think the reason why a lot of lawyers, I know I recommend you always need to follow everything up with the written document, is because of that. You have to then prove it that something that was agreed verbally is actually binding. And the unfortunate thing with verbal agreements as well is that you don't even get into the meat of things, that in the event there's a dispute, how are we going to deal with that? All you really ever deal with in a verbal agreement is, okay, I'll do this, you do that, sharp, and that's it. But you don't get into the meat of the things. The whole basis of entering into a contract, and I always say this, is you enter into a written contract for in the event that things don't work out, in the event that you want to exit, because it's all good and well when you're happy to do things. You never have to terminate an agreement that you're happy with. So if we're happy and it's a once-off thing, it's basic, we do it, it's done, then cool. But I might come back and say, Tsulu, you sold me this wig, but this wig is falling apart. I haven't even washed it in ink. Then how do we deal with that? Because you haven't given me any sort of undertakings, any warranties as to quality. You haven't said anything, really. So that's why you enter into a written contract. It will stipulate all these provisions and clauses that help you deal with in the event something goes wrong.
Okay, so let's shift to social media, because you get... ambassadors nowadays, and you get influencers, and then you see them with all these sponsored posts or paid by, is there an agreement there? is there like a contract there in line? Do you think they have something like that?
So there are different types of contracts that deal with these kind of relationships. So with an ambassador, that you generally enter into brand ambassador agreements. With, for example, a sponsor, you'd enter into a sponsorship agreement, and with an influencer, you'd enter into an influencer agreement, or alternatively, you enter into what is also known as a collaboration agreement.
Yes.
But all these agreements, they could all, you could literally have one agreement that covers all these facets, because they're very similar, and a lot of the times they get muddied, and people don't understand the difference between each. I mean, in the when we first started out, influencer agreements would not have even been in the picture. I mean, even 2 years ago, but now they are in the picture. And sometimes influencer and brand ambassador agreements very similar. It's just always more of the formalities of the arrangement and the duration of that agreement that would differ.
So we all saw that tweet, aka when he was part of Reebok. I don't know if we should put it as that. What really happened there? What might have transpired there?
Well, I mean, from his tweets, he says that he didn't have a contract with Reebok. So someone asked him a question around the whole Reebok deal, and he was like, well, I didn't have a contract with Reebok. And I was just like,
how does that work?
And then he went on to say the only agreement that he had with them was a brand ambassador agreement, but he didn't have one for the creation of the sneakers. And in my mind, and I think he had an agreement.
I think so.
Yeah, the difference is that it wasn't a written agreement.
I mean, how would the approach work without an agreement?
Exactly. So the fact that, firstly, they agreed on what he was going to do. They probably had everybody's obligations, whether it was through meetings, whether it was through WhatsApp, emails, texts, whatever. All of that stuff, if you put it together and you end up with a rolling out of a plan, you've got an agreement. The only problem is in this particular situation is that he says he didn't get paid for it. So there wasn't an agreement based on the money, even though he mentioned that they had agreed on. He says he didn't get paid, but they had agreed on the royalty amount to be X percentage. I forgot what percentage he said. So even with that, actually technically, they would have also agreed on that amount, unless Reebok came and said, no, we're not going to pay you 2.5% or whatever amount it was. But another interesting thing is that during this whole thing when it was happening, Reebok came out and said, no, there was an agreement and everybody fulfilled its obligations. So you're technically like, no, aka, if there was a meeting of the minds, as in you guys all agreed on what it is that who's your roles, responsibilities, you agreed on how much you're going to get paid, you agreed on rollout, you agreed on everything. It ran, it was smooth. None of us would have known there was any issues.
I mean, he was
not raised
posting
it.
happily,
exactly,
and with the hashtags, sponsored. He was fine at the time.
Exactly, and that in itself then speaks to that, because firstly, he's of age, because with South African contract laws, that there's certain requirements that you must meet. Firstly, you must have the meeting of the mind. Secondly, you must be of legal age, or you must be an emancipated minor, which is someone who's made an application to the court, who's younger than the age of majority, but has made an application to the court to be treated as a major. And then, or an assisted minor with the guardian or any third party who's acting on behalf of this child who's below age. So you have to be of majority. Second, the thirdly is that there's certain formalities that must be met around that. So with some contracts, you need to have it written in order for it to be a valid contract. So for example, if you're buying property, you have to have a written agreement for the sale of property, for the transfer of an immovable property. If you are transferring any sort of IP, you have to have a written agreement, so it can't be verbal. So those are the formalities. So some certain contracts or engagements require that a written contract is in place, So those are the major ones that must be there in order for you to determine whether there's a contract. So AKA is old. He's above 21.
Yes,
even.
Definitely.
So that's check. The meeting of the mind, from what he said, from what Reebok said, from the actions of the parties, there was meeting of the mind. Formalities, that's why we're sitting here right now, and him saying there isn't a contract, and Reebok saying there was an agreement. So you don't know if they're saying there was an agreement, they mean whether it was a written agreement or by virtue of the fact that the parties spoke and reached this point that they are, that there is an agreement that was in place. So he already ticks off those three
boxes,
key, those 3 key boxes, which means then, in my view, there was a contract. And I mean, the fact that he also mentioned the whole brand ambassadorship agreement and said, no, but I've got a brand ambassador agreement, which, unless the brand ambassador agreement addressed issues around future collaborations, etc., then you wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on it, because it is different. A collaboration agreement versus the brand ambassador, it's gonna look different, because the roles and the responsibilities are different.
Yeah, definitely. So just to put it out there, what are the main things to kind of sort of look out for in a contract? Whether, I know you've mentioned the fact that you've mentioned the stuff to look out for which validates a contract. So what are the key things to look out for in a contract which might actually kind of be sort of included in almost all kind of contract, whether you're working in corporate, whether you're in the entertainment industry, or just so okay, look, this thing kind of protects me, this thing is for the better, or
okay. So I think the most important clauses are always the duration and the termination clause. So duration meaning how long you're going to be bound to this agreement for. Are you entering into a 1 year, 6 months, obligation or deliverable agreement, meaning that you have to deliver a certain product in order for you to get out of the contract. So you, for example, a lot of recording contracts would have an album obligation versus a term. So they'll say you are signed for a 5 album term, and now 5 album could be 5 years, it could be 20 years, those the kind of stuff you look
at. Sorry, I just want to add something onto there. I just want to find out. So if you are signed to this label and now you have to produce 5 albums, obviously they give you a time frame when to release these albums.
Not obviously. Sometimes they don't. So what happens is that sometimes if you're not a proactive, for example, I know a particular person who had a contract with one of the major labels in South Africa. He wanted to get out of that agreement with them. He had a 3 album obligation to them. He released the 3 albums and he said, there's your 3 albums. And he's like, I've fulfilled my obligations to you because there's my 3 albums.
So is there a certain requirement on how much the albums should kind of, make?
Like, imagine you're having a tough time. It's lockdown, it's COVID. You guys can't go out there and market your albums. Now you must try new creative things, and now there's an obligation. What if your sound is not a good sound for the market at the time? So any artist would agree to a minimum amount that they need to make in order for the contract to be fulfilled. Oh no, not like that. No, not like that. I mean, of course there's recoupment clauses that would say how much the label will recoup from all the costs that they've spent, and they would get this money from royalties, either royalties from a SAMRO or any other forms of revenue that come in. If it's like a 360, then they'll say we'll take X amount until you've met your obligations. But there isn't any sort of, I would never recommend anybody agrees to 1 million. If you don't reach the 1 million, then you can't get out of the contract. Oh no. No.
All right. So okay, we're gonna go back to that question now. So you mentioned when I asked Hori, what are the sort of clauses, points to look out for?
The other one, and especially for creatives, is the intellectual property clause. Who's going to own the intellectual property? That is very important. I mean, even with things like brand ambassador agreement, influencer agreement, even sponsorship agreement and collaboration agreements, those kind of contracts, you need to be certain who's owning what. Because remember, with content creators, with influencers, for example, they will take pictures. They will take pictures, videos, and put it up on their social media. Who do those pictures belong to? Do they belong to the brand? Do they belong to them? Do they belong to the agent? Because remember, there's also the agent that might be the middleman between the brand, the agent, and the influencer. So you have to look at all that. IP clause is very important. I mean, across the board with anything. In employment contracts, there's an IP clause. In services agreements, for example, if you're providing services to an IT company, or an IT company is providing services to you as a company, there would be an IP clause to say, does the IP belong to us as the service provider, or does it belong to you as the client? And at what point will the IP then transfer? Is it upon, if I've asked you to create a software for me, I've asked you to create a software for me, you create the software, you punch in all the code, etc. When does the IP transfer to me? Because I've commissioned you to do something for me. If I'm using a white label, which is a software that is anybody can use, it's open source, it's open to the market, you can just add your logo to it. If I'm using a white label thing and it's created, a software that's created by a particular IT company, then all good and well that the IP will belong to them. However, the minute I put my logo on it, I do whatever I do to it, then I've got a certain right that I've created to that. You know, so it's very important to have that issue around the IP ironed out. Who's going to own it? I mean, even with brands, for example, if you've got an ambassador agreement, by virtue of entering into ambassador agreement, it's not like the brand is giving you the right to own the IP. They're just giving you the right to, they're giving you the benefit of wearing their clothes for a certain amount. So the IP clause is extremely important for me. Like I said, the termination, when I mentioned the duration, termination is also very important to me, in that you need to know how you're going to get out of this agreement if things don't work out. So you must make sure that you can get out of the agreement. If you can't get out of the agreement, you know, you're screwed. And that's where a lot of artists and creatives end up being.
I actually wanted to mention that fact, that I feel like in most cases, that's where the drama kind of begins, when you start wanting to own yourself, or you start wanting to buy yourself out, or you know, that kind of stuff. I mean, we've seen it with Kanye West as well, with the whole incident where he's trying to own his music. You know, it's a whole fiasco. It's not an easy road.
It's not. And if you don't have ways out, because what you could say, and I always recommend it, is that if you're going to enter into a contract with label, all the obligations are looking at the artist. Most of the obligations, most of it is like, if the artist breaches, but what if label breaches? And most of the agreements don't speak to in the event that the label breaches. The label may breach in that they don't provide you with the necessary support that you need for you to record the album. If they're not providing you with the necessary support, then in your contract you haven't made provision for what happens in that event. Unless we all go through the contract, and now I must do some fancy footwork, and I must now find loopholes in your agreement in order for you to get out of that agreement. But you could have resolved this at the onset and had a proper termination and a breach clause that covers, that's mutual, that covers both parties, versus it being in the event the artist breaches, because that's all, those are like, that's the only thing that is said in these agreements, you know?
Another thing that I wanted to run past is a contract amendable? Like, is it possible for them to add a page where you guys, you know, come together, have a meeting, and then you speak out your differences, and then you come to a conclusion, and then obviously now you want to amend? Is it possible to do something like that?
It's called an addendum. So what you do is you'd add an addendum to the agreement. So for the most part, it's mainly used when you do want to change certain provisions of the contract, and in most instances it's where parties decide that they want to extend the relationship. Let's say we've agreed to a 1-year contract and we work well together, we're happy to continue working together. Then we say, well, since we've worked this 1 year, we want to extend it for an additional 2 years, and on top of that, then we have to relook and renegotiate, let's say, the rate or the fee that's being paid, to say, okay, I was paying you 1 million for service X for a period of 1 year. Now we're extending for an additional 2 years. I'm going to pay 1 million every month plus CPI, I mean every year, plus CPI, you know, or something like that. You can agree on those terms. And even you might even want to change the services a bit, add something, remove something, but you can do that, and it's called an addendum. So it's possible. It's something that you can do. It's not done a lot in the recording industry, except if it's to extend the contract versus trying to amend to try and make the terms a lot more favorable. Record labels are in the business of making money, and amending for an artist who didn't read the agreement in the first place, that's not their business.
So now does this mean that the whole contract might kind of have to sort of be relooked? Because I don't know, I mean, that amendment might also, you know, go over some other law which is in the contract.
So you obviously, when you're doing an addendum, let me not say obviously, when you are doing an addendum, right, you look at all the provisions to see whether there's anything that will hinge on changing this one aspect. So for example, if you're doing an addendum for duration, you need to then look at if you've got service annexures or service levels, what do they speak to? Do they speak to a certain term?
Yeah.
If they speak to a certain term, then you need to change those to align them to the new amended term.
Yeah.
If there are any dates that are made reference to in the agreement, for example, they'll say, you need to make sure that you provide such services at by X period of time. You would already reach that fulfillment date because now you're sitting at addendum stage. Then you change that and say at clause X we're replacing it with clause Y, and clause Y speaks to XYZ.
Yeah.
So it is possible. You have to look at the whole agreement. You can't just look at one portion because
Fix that, didn't
it's going to take the whole document out of sync.
Yeah. Oh, interesting chat about contracts. Contracts can go on forever.
No, I mean, I'm not even done with the important clauses, but it's fine.
Yeah, no, No, we can sort of touch on important points that you think that people need to take notice of. You can just sort of throw it in there, like.
Yeah, I think the one of the other ones, and mainly for things like the brand sponsorship, because I think those are contracts that a lot of creatives deal with. So with brand ambassador, influencers,
and there's a big right now. There's a lot of those right now.
Yeah, so those ones, for example, another thing that you need to look at is the exclusivity clause. Is this an exclusive agreement? When you're signing this, are you saying you're exclusively going to sign only with this party, and is the exclusivity blanket to cover every single aspect of sponsorship, brand ambassadorship, or does it only speak to a specific sector? So I'll use the example. There was one case study when I was doing my master's around a certain sports star. He was a tennis player. He entered into a contract with Wilson's, the tennis racket company, and then he entered into another contract with a shoe company. The shoe company was not Wilson's, but his sponsorship was only for the racket.
Yes.
Then the question was, no, but you've got an exclusivity agreement with us. And I was like, no, but my exclusivity should only be limited to the tennis racket.
So what?
But the agreement didn't say
that.
So
he took a picture, or was there footage of him with the racket and wearing different kinds of...
Yes, he was playing. He was on, because remember, with tennis players, you have to practice using the sponsored racket or whatever the apparel is when you're on the court playing, when you're doing any promotional stuff, you have to wear that, whatever the sponsor is. In this instance, he had to use the racket.
Okay.
But it didn't say he can't have any other sponsors, but they're saying no, but we were saying it's exclusive, irrespective. We didn't just say the racket. So that was the whole fight. So it's very important for you to be clear, because I might get a sponsor for earrings, for example, but then what if this earring person doesn't make lipstick and I like lipstick, and now Max says we want to give you a sponsorship for lipstick, but the earring person says no, but you've got an exclusive agreement with me, and it's like, but you only sell earrings. So that's why it's very important, even with influencers, is there requirement that after rolling out a certain campaign for us, you can't do any other campaigns in general or that are within the certain sector industry. If it's like, a lot of them do all these, these beverages. If that beverage says, no, you've done our beverage today, you can't do another beverage until 6 months later. So those are kind of things you need to take into account, which would also then determine the rates that you're charging, which is the same even with brand ambassadorship agreements, even sponsorship agreements, which is also important, because let's say an event is being sponsored by XYZ, SAB is sponsoring an event. Now SAB says you can't have Ciroc, because Ciroc is owned by Diageo. It's not a SAB brand. Now you're sitting there. Actually, I should flip it around and say, we've got a Ciroc Diageo contract. They sponsor you. Now you can't have Heineken. You can't have all these other beers there because it's Ciroc. You have to have the drinks that Diageo would have under their banner. So if you enter into that agreement, now you're sitting there, people are drinking Strongbow, and not everybody likes Strongbow. I mean, I'm saying this, I don't know if it's even under Diageo, but you get what I mean? So you'd have to be careful with that. And of course, the very last one is the price. It's always important to look at the price. What is the price? What is the cost? What is the rate, honey? You don't want to go into any contract and then your rate is like too low, but you've signed this exclusivity agreement
for a certain period.
You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, you've also signed over IP, but you've only charged like 20,000 rand for whatever, you know. So you have to be very mindful of that. And I think maybe another thing that I need to touch on, which is important for things like brand ambassador, influencers, and the likes, is that there's also certain legislation that you need to look at, you know, for you know, with the sponsored post, you have to say that it's sponsored according to, you know, the advertising standards in South Africa. It's the same across the board in the US and the UK. You have to stipulate that it was sponsored. And from a South African perspective, for example, you know, the Tobacco Products Controls Act would speak to the fact that if you're a sponsor for a cigarette, there has to be certain confines within which you can do it. I mean, we remember back in the day, Rothmans and all these, Stuyvesant, and everybody used to have these huge campaigns that would be sponsoring sports events, they'd be sponsoring concerts, they'd be the main sponsors of everything. But because the legislation changed, now there's certain ways they can sponsor, and there's certain rules and requirements for them to follow in order to do the sponsorship. So it's just, there's a lot that you need to look out for and need to be mindful of.
I remember that there was an incident where Kim, I think it was Kim, she had endorsed a product, or wasn't it? Yes. And and she never disclosed the fact that she was paid for it, you know. She made it seem like it was just a natural thing, she was drinking it, and people just need to start getting onto the tea.
Exactly. And they started doing that. I mean, something even further than that is that in the UK there's a proposed law to say that if you are an influencer or you're a celebrity or anybody like that, if you post a picture, you have to say whether you've added a filter or whatever. You know, so it all comes up. Yes, you know, the whole Khloe Kardashian, there's that picture where Khloe is looking like Beyonce and Malika. She's not looking like a white girl, you know, or an Armenian white girl. So so there's a whole thing where they've tabled a new legislation in the UK. I'm not sure how far it's gotten now, where you have to say that you've added a filter.
Wow.
Because people are sitting here, people are killing themselves. There's a lot of body dysmorphia issues and depression because of how people look.
Bleaching is a big one.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So things like that. I mean, the regulations there, I think, would be also quite tricky with bleaching, because some in these countries are different when it comes to bleaching. So so those are probably the more important ones around the influencers. And I think maybe I said that was the last one, but another thing that I think is important that you need to know as an influencer is that when you're a brand ambassador, whatever contract you're entering into, you need to know who the party that you're contracting with is. So for example, you're a brand.
Yeah.
There's an agent and then there's me.
Yeah.
I'm the influencer in this instance.
Yeah.
I'm entering into an agreement with the agent.
Okay.
If the agent doesn't pay me, it's not the brand's obligation to pay me, because the brand would have already paid the agent to pay me.
Yeah.
So now you can't fight and say, oh, I mean, there's an incident right now. I'll use this one in particular where a couple of influencers did some campaign for MTN.
Yeah.
And they had an agent. There was a third-party agent who got the influencers on behalf of an agent of the brand. So there were two agents in the mix here. There was the agent who was managing the influencers.
Okay.
There was the agent that was managing the agent of the influencers, and then there was brand.
Yeah.
So there's brand, there's the main agent, then there's the influencer agent, and then there's the influencers.
Okay.
So the influencers would have entered into a contract with the influencer agent, whether it was written, verbal, whatever. They would have had whatever agreement they've got. This other agent person would have had an agreement with the agency would have had an agreement with brand. Now, the influencer agent didn't pay the influencers for the campaign. Yeah. People are going at MTN, they're going at this agency, I forgot what the agency's name is. They're going at them, pay us, pay our money. And it's like, who did you enter into this agreement with? The obligation is not on MTN to pay, especially if MTN has already paid these other people.
But how
in
do
the
you
chain.
Know that?
Because you look at your agreement. Who are you entering into the agreement with?
Yeah, definitely.
If that's why you need to read. It's important to know who the parties are in this particular agreement. If I'm entering into agreement in my personal capacity and I'm entering into with a company or with somebody, I'm talking to you right now, and then you decide you've got a company and you want us to enter into the agreement using the company versus in our personal capacity, then I must make sure that I know that.
Yeah.
Because if something goes wrong, now I can't come and try and attach Tolu's personal things. I must go and attach the company. If I want to sue, I'm going to sue the company. I'm not going to sue you. But you know, if you're a sole proprietor or you've one director, they call it.
What is a sole proprietor?
I think we must do an episode on that.
Yeah,
we must do an episode on that. But a sole proprietor is someone who enters into a business, an entity all by themselves. You know, you are the business. There's no difference between you and the business.
Okay,
you are one in the same, and you are a one-man show. You don't open a PTY Ltd. You know, so we can also have a discussion around that. Okay. But yeah. So I think that covers a lot.
Yeah, I did. I think you guys are kind of clued up now on contracts and, you know, the entertainment side of it as well, where we tied into sponsorship, collaboration, ambassadors. You know, I think it was very beneficial, if we should put it.
Okay. Well,
and I think now you guys know the importance of, you know, jotting things down.
Writing things down.
Jotting
means your keywords and notes.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm joking.
Yeah, no, but it is jotting down. It is picking up keywords and So the importance of, you know, getting into a proper contract, signing up, you know, making sure that things are done legally, you know, and even when you do go into a verbal agreement, you guys find a way to write it down.
Ultimately, don't enter into verbal agreements.
No, I didn't think that they were recognized, because in my mind as an individual, I feel like if I've said something, tomorrow a person could just change the whole thing and say no, but that's not what I agreed on.
Yeah, but no, they are recognized. And I mean, maybe we can get into a separate conversation, but with respect to that, even if you've said something, let's say if I act on what we've agreed to, where I pay you the amount, and now all of a sudden, instead of giving me a blonde wig, you give me a brown one. Then I can say, you know, but I asked for the brown one, whatever. The reason I paid you is because I paid you on the basis that I was getting X, Y, Z. So if you can show that you've actually all fulfilled obligations, you would have given me a wig. I would have paid you, and our contract was verbal, and it means that we somehow, there was some sort of agreement that was there, and the fact that you have acted on what we agreed to as your obligations, even though incorrectly, and I have acted on my obligation, and whether it was fully or otherwise. So even in that stage, you can prove, because then some people would also dispute and say,
it's
no,
all
but
about
we didn't
proving.
have a contract. Then they'll say, no, but we didn't have a contract. Then I'll say, no, but your actions speak to the fact that we had a contract. So now how can you deny that we had a contract? Why were you providing me what you provided me if we didn't have a contract? So it's to kind of help in those instances where you don't want people to get away with not paying you what's due to you because of the fact that we didn't have a contract. Great. That was long.
It's the Creative Circuit Chats on Instagram. Follow us, like our page, comment. We're very happy to take questions. We answer your questions the best way we think we can. So till next time.